We're moving into your parents' house. I take it they've relocated to the countryside? We now own that mansion. What are you talking about? Jill is my name. I will soon be in my 30s. Jeff and I get along well. We were married a few years ago. The folks who reside close by, my in-laws, are really kind. I have a calm life and get along well with my birth parents. After many years of living in New York, my parents made the decision to retire to a secluded area in the countryside at some point. The city is indeed too noisy, it's inconvenient, but the countryside life suits us better, they stated. My parents were reared in the country, but due of my father's work, we lived in the city. I had no objections if they wanted to go back to the country. For a while, the city home they had occupied remained unoccupied. I thus made the decision to periodically assume control and moved my parents out to the country. However, this brought up an unforeseen issue. It took place a few months after my parents moved to the country. One evening after dinner, I was looking at the pictures my parents had sent as I was having a conversation with Jeff. They both seemed to be really into their vegetable garden and enjoying their life in the countryside. They seemed to enjoy the country? Jeff said, I'm surprised because I thought they liked living in the city. They grew up in a rural area at first. Hello, Jeff. Have you ever considered moving to a rural area in the future? In jest, I inquired about our future with Jeff. Jeff abruptly got up from his seat as I was still telling him my story. Taken aback by his sudden need, he pulled out his smartphone and started to dial. Mom, Dad, maybe our idea will succeed. Tomorrow, let's carry out his strategy. What the heck? What happened, Jeff? I have to stop waiting. We must carry over my folks' belongings first. After saying those remarks, Jeff dashed to the door and disappeared. He must have gone far since I heard the vehicle start. I was clueless about the situation. Additionally, there was just one automobile at the house, so I was unable to follow Jeff. All I could do was wait, hazily, for him to come back. I waited alone for Jeff till late that evening. He did not respond to my emails, nor did he answer his phone. I finally made the decision to sleep by myself, but what happened the next morning was somewhat different. Jill, please wake up. We need to get packed immediately. You're back, Jeff? Where have you been to? What does packing mean to you? I had just woken up, so I questioned, perplexed. With great excitement, he said, We're moving into your parents' house. I take it they've already made the move to the country. We now own that mansion. What are you talking about? Come on, hurry up. Let's start with my stuff. You start packing too. My parents will come to help us soon. Rubbing my eyes, I managed to understand that Jeff wanted to move. Judging by the keywords like countryside and mansion, it seemed he was aiming for the residence where my parents once lived. Normally, I would avoid discussing this with others, but my childhood home, my parents' old house, was a luxurious mansion worth $1 million. Before I could respond to this realization, Jeff grabbed his luggage and hurriedly left the house. Within a few minutes, my in-laws arrived at our house. Jill, have you finished packing yet? Well, I suppose you won't need much of your stuff, they said. That's right. Since she's going to live with us as a daughter-in-law, she wouldn't need much. 2 sets of summer clothes and 2 sets of winter clothes should be enough, right? Dispose of everything else and come. The room in the shoe area right next to the entrance will be enough for you, right? Make sure to bring minimal belongings. Come on! How long are you going to dawdle around? Why don't you hurry up and come to the new house? Our stuff was already brought over yesterday. My in-laws, who had been kind until then, began saying strange things. What are you talking about? I asked in a lowered voice due to their sudden rude remarks. They replied, We mean exactly what we said. From today, you are working in our house as a maid. Of course, continue working outside as usual, but we'll manage your salary, so be prepared for that. Why both of you? What has happened? You have been so kind until now. I still tried to hope this was a nightmare. No, I wanted to believe it was a nightmare. But as if to shatter that hope, they declared, "We were kind to you because we were after your wealth. We were considerate because your parents are wealthy. It's been tiring to pretend all these times, but now we can drop the act altogether. That's right, your parents aren't planning to come back from the countryside, are they? Then you should serve us from now on." The reason they had been kind to me was due to my family's wealth. Indeed, my family is financially better off than an average household. But to think that my in-laws saw us in such a way. Ah, Jill, have you finally woken up? And you haven't packed yet. Well, never mind. We didn't plan to take your stuff anyway. Can you help us unpack at the new house? Although I was still dazed due to the shock, Jeff spoke to me in the same way. I understood then that Jeff was also after my wealth, just like his parents. However, there were 3 of them, and resistance was impossible. I was put in the car and taken away to my parents' residence. The biggest room is mine, as I am the master of the house. Jill, don't enter it unless you're cleaning. I'll take the hobby room for myself. It has plenty of bookshelves, and I've always been envious of it. Then I guess I'll use the room that used to be the study. Studying is a man's dream, after all. My parents' house was in disarray and bore no resemblance to its former self. When Jeff left the previous day, he must have taken the keys to this house without permission. During the night, my in-laws must have secretly moved in their belongings. The interiors my parents loved were all pushed to the corners, and the house was filled with items my in-laws and Jeff preferred. This curtain is in poor taste, but maybe we could sell it for some money. These foreign magazines might be valuable too, right? Let's sell them and have a lavish barbecue party. They laughed joyously as they trashed the house. Stop doing whatever you want. This isn't Jeff's house, nor is it your house. Even as I tried to stop them, they didn't listen. Quiet. If no one's using it, it's no problem if we take over it. That's right. I've always dreamt of living in a large city mansion. Anyway, can you mop the whole house? The robot vacuum is fine, but a mop suits you better, Jill. Watching the house I grew up in being destroyed, I felt deep despair. Why is it being destroyed so carelessly? Still, I cannot give up here. My parents have moved to the countryside, but I must protect this house. Do you really think it's okay to do as you please like this? Huh. Why are you acting so high and mighty? This house is mine now. I can do whatever I want in my own house, Jeff said when I confronted him, acting as if he owned the place. I was truly shocked. You all don't understand anything. Completely fed up, I decided that showing evidence would be more effective than arguing. I took out my smartphone and contacted someone. What are you doing? Don't tell me you're asking for help from your parents in the countryside. That's pointless. By the time they come from the countryside, this house will already be ours. From now on, we will change this house into ours completely, so there's no turning back. They seemed to think I was trying to say something to my parents, but I left their misunderstanding unaddressed. There was no need for me to correct them. After all, the truth would soon come to light. And as I expected, everything was resolved in 10 minutes. Jill, sorry to keep you waiting. Nick, sorry for calling you out of the blue. No need to apologize, Nick. What are you doing here? Seeing that I had called my brother Nick, Jeff turned pale. Nick then looked sternly at Jeff. Jeff, what is this all about? Can you explain? Well, you see? The moment Nick arrived, Jeff's face turned ashen, and there was a good reason for that. Nick was, in fact, a benefactor to Jeff. A few years ago, during an economic downturn, Jeff had lost his job. He had no particular qualifications and had a hard time finding a new workplace. At that time, Nick helped him and gave him an opportunity to work at his company. Frankly, he's not the type I'd hire if he weren't your husband, Jill. but for the sake of my beloved sister, I want him to work hard. Nick, I appreciate this. I will never forget this favor. Given these circumstances, Jeff was in no position to defy him. Pale-faced, he struggled to find an excuse. Jill's room is the room in the shoe storage area, and you're selling our parents' decorative items? What are you talking about? Well, but an empty house deteriorates fast. I thought it would be better if we live here and manage it. Even so, why would Jill's room be the one in the shoe storage area? And having your parents manage her salary is clearly abnormal, isn't it? That is... Jeff continued to desperately make excuses, but Nick would not accept them. Despite Jeff's attempts to escape the situation, Nick spoke calmly. First of all, what do you mean by living in my house without permission? No, Nick, that's not it. I meant I was going to live in your parents' house. I checked with Jill, but it seems you really don't understand. This house was only borrowed by our parents from me. It's officially under my name, and it's my house. Jeff was shocked by Nick's words. However, by now, Nick and I were beyond exasperated because, after all, it was an obvious fact. When Jeff was laid off, it wasn't just him who was saved by Nick. Around the same time Jeff was dismissed, my father's company was also facing a financial crisis. At that time, my father was preparing to sell all his assets to clear his debts. But Nick stepped in to help. If you sell the house, Dad, we would lose our home too. So don't worry. I'll buy it under proper terms. And you two won't have to struggle with your living conditions. Since then, my parents have been living with assistance from Nick. The reason they moved to the countryside was not just because they liked it there. They also didn't want to burden Nick any further. You vandalize my house and treat my sister terribly. You're not only incompetent at work, but also have a terrible personality. I see no reason to keep employing someone like you. Hey, what? No, Nick, are you serious? Do you think I'm not serious? As Nick declared him fired, Jeff started to panic. Then he turned to me and threw out these words. But if I lose my job, Jill will be in trouble. We are married after all. However, Jeff's statement was out of place. I no longer wanted to trouble my brother, and I made my position clear. What are you talking about? Considering what you've done to me, divorce is obvious, isn't it? So even if you lose your job now, it has nothing to do with me. Honestly, I think it serves you right. Don't say such things. It will be tough for my parents, too. Hearing Jeff's words, my in-laws, who had been silent until then, also spoke up. That's right. Jill is kind-hearted. She wouldn't do such a thing. We had a good relationship, didn't we? Did you forget what you said to me this morning? Do you really think I would worry about your future now? That's impossible. At that moment, Jeff and my in-laws realized that my brother and I were not going to give in. Eventually, they followed my brother's orders and removed their belongings from our family home. Later, the family lawyer, whom my brother had contacted, was present as we discussed the divorce. Look, I'm going to be unable to work soon, so transfer all the property to me. Jill loves me, so she will surely allow it, right? We also rely on Jeff's income. Jill, please help us. Jill, have mercy on us, they pleaded, desperate to get their hands on the property. However, I had no intention of showing them mercy. I just checked, but you threw away my personal belongings without permission. That included valuable jewelry, you know. We thought it was cheeky for you to own such things, so we threw them away for you, they admitted. Ah, you've admitted to throwing them away, so you'll have to compensate me, I replied firmly. Mom, what are you doing? Jeff exclaimed, flustered. The discussion was completely led by us from the beginning to the end. Jeff and his parents had thrown away many of my belongings from the previous night until then. This included unopened cosmetics, valuable accessories, and some very expensive out-of-print books. Why do I, who have lost my job, have to suffer like this? "This is terrible," Jeff complained. As a result, Jeff relinquished most of his assets, and the divorce was finalized. But it didn't end there. My in-laws, who had claimed to be financially strained due to their pension, ended up having to pay me compensation for their harassment. Why do we have to pay, even though we are on a pension? Why is a daughter-in-law acting superior to us in the first place? They whined. That's really true. We feel no respect from her, they added. They accused me of being a cold person, but that was irrelevant. I refused their request to reduce the amount and demanded the promised compensation. After the divorce was finalized, my brother and I decided to demolish our family home and sell the land. I really want to keep this house because it's full of memories, but it would be unpleasant and troublesome if Jeff and his family come here, right? So, let's sell the house, I suggested. Yes, I think that's better too. This place is inconvenient for both you and me to commute from, my brother agreed. The house was filled with many memories, and I would have liked to keep it as it was. However, the thought of Jeff and his family stepping foot there was extremely unpleasant and would also be a hassle, making it a major burden for us. We have many photos taken as a family, and these photos will forever remain vivid in our hearts. These memories will never be forgotten, but what is even more important is completely cutting ties with Jeff and his family and starting a new chapter in our lives. This allows us to embrace new happiness and a peaceful life. Afterward, I continued to work actively as before, enjoying my days. My brother is also expanding his business, leading a busier yet more fulfilling life. Additionally, my parents have passionately embarked on a new endeavor of growing different types of vegetables, planning to take on the challenge of cultivating new varieties. I heard that Jeff and his parents are facing financial and professional difficulties and have even lost their place to live. However, their situation has no impact on us now. We are now focused on saying goodbye to the memories with Jeff and his family and starting a completely new life. What we understand is that there are things far more valuable than money or the luxury of a house. My name is Kristen, and I am currently working from home as an illustrator. Steve and I have been married for 15 years now. We have a son named Alex, who is in his second year of middle school. He has a mischievous side, and as he is going through puberty, each day feels like it slightly wears on my heart. Currently, our family is living with Steve's parents, a situation that came about at the suggestion of my in-laws. Steve has 2 sisters. One is married and has left home, while the other remains unemployed and mostly stays in her room. We agreed to live together following their request for support. However, this living arrangement has become a significant source of stress for me. Initially, my in-laws were kind, but over time they began to become more demanding. When working from home, I am criticized as if I were just playing around. When doing housework, I am told to clean more thoroughly, without understanding my work-from-home situation. Attempts to explain are dismissed as making excuses. As a result, I have given up on trying to convince or explain to them. I have explained the situation to my husband and asked for his intervention more than once or twice. When Steve spoke to his parents about my work, they dismissed it, saying, "It probably doesn't earn much and is just play, not work." And he did not argue further. It's clear I am not just playing around. I have seriously acquired clients, and while my annual income was $50,000 when we got married, it has now grown to $100,000, and I work with numerous companies. I believe Steve understood this, but his true feelings remain unclear. This situation has continued for 15 years, but I do not intend to endure it indefinitely. I have been secretly saving money, and I am close to reaching my goal. Once the goal is achieved, I plan to buy a luxurious high-rise condo and start a new life there with Steve and Alex. Steve agrees with this plan, and I am looking forward to a promising future. Steve, we're almost at our target amount, I said to my husband, who was browsing on his phone in bed after finishing housework and work. He glanced at me and responded with a lackluster reaction. His response disheartened me, and I lost the energy to continue the conversation. Sighing deeply, I asked, "Don't you like it?" "It's not that I don't like it. I'm just wondering how to tell my parents," Steve murmured while fiddling with his phone. Indeed, we had not yet informed his parents about our plan to purchase the condo. However, I was not deeply troubled by this matter. I thought that once the condo's paperwork advanced to a stage where cancellation was impossible, his parents would have no choice but to accept it. This turned out to be the right approach. After a few months, I managed to save the target amount and successfully acquired the high-rise condo, which is in Steve's name. Although I earn more, the uncertainty of my home-based work made us decide it was safer to have the property in his name, as he has a relatively stable job. Preparations went smoothly, and as the moving day approached, we decided to inform his parents about the move and the purchase of the condo. They were surprised when they learned about the condo, but ultimately raised no objections. A few days after the discussion, we moved into the luxurious high-rise condo as planned and started our new life as a family of 3. For the first time since our marriage, we managed to acquire a spacious home with a 5-room layout, including a bedroom for us, a room for Alex, and a workspace for me where I can comfortably progress my work with no issues. We were enjoying our happy times when, shortly after moving, a request came from a well-known company I contracted with, asking me to visit their office. The company is quite a distance from our current high-rise condo, requiring an airplane flight to visit. Moreover, the trip would be challenging, necessitating an overnight stay. Despite this, I was required to stay at the company for about 3 days, engaging in various meetings that necessitated illustration work. Consequently, I arranged a 4-night, 5-day schedule, shared the information with my husband, Steve, and departed for the state where the company is located. A few days later, the meetings with the company concluded smoothly, and I returned to our high-rise condo. The following day, exhausted, I bought some prepared food on my way home and arrived around 6 p.m. Since it was a holiday, I expected Steve to be home. However, upon opening the front door, I discovered several unfamiliar shoes lined up. At first, I thought Alex's friends had visited, but it was clear those weren't the shoes of youngsters. Wondering if perhaps they belonged to Steve's colleagues, I quietly made my way to the living room and slowly opened the door. There, I saw my in-laws relaxing at the dining table. "Excuse me," I approached my in-laws with surprise and greeted them, to which they cheerfully responded, "Welcome back. We're happy to see you." However, I was too perplexed to reply. At that moment, Steve, who had been watching TV, came over to us. I gave him a look that demanded an explanation. He casually mentioned, "After telling my mother about your 4-night, 5-day absence, she decided to come over right away." "Leaving your son and grandson for a trip? What were you thinking?" his mother reproachfully commented after Steve's explanation. "No, it wasn't a trip." I hurriedly corrected her misunderstanding, but the looks on my in-laws' faces were clearly skeptical. "Lies are unacceptable. Was that your purpose for leaving the house?" My father-in-law raised his voice at me, and my mother-in-law joined him with a menacing look. "Could it be that you're engaging in infidelity?" My mother-in-law sneered, casting a contemptuous gaze and mocking words at me. "I'm completely innocent of such actions. It was for work purposes." I raised my voice in defense against the baseless accusation. "Your agitation is suspicious." My mother-in-law laughed, sipping her coffee and taking a deep breath. "Is that really so?" Steve cast a cold glance at me, seemingly taking his mother's words at face value. However, I had already thoroughly explained the situation to Steve and provided evidence to prove it. even sending him photos taken with colleagues at the business trip. Yet I was frustrated that he harbored doubts, believing his mother's words. By the way, we've decided to move in here. Amid my frustration with Steve, this unexpected statement came from my mother-in-law. To ensure this doesn't happen again in the future, we thought it's necessary to supervise. We've also started the process of selling the house. Moreover, we've changed the ownership of this condo into Dad's name. My mother-in-law continued with surprising comments. Before I could catch up, I was completely bewildered and looked at Steve for help. He avoided my gaze, clearly confused. What do you mean you've changed the ownership? That's not something simple, is it? Seemingly amused by my distress, my mother-in-law looked at me with a smile. The process wasn't that complicated. As if avoiding further explanation, she stood up and left for the living room where the TV was. At that point, I could only rely on Steve. Later, I took him to the bedroom to urge him to explain the situation, but he began to speak reluctantly. It turned out my in-laws had taken a liking to the high-rise condo on the day they visited and decided to move in immediately. Furthermore, considering that Steve's sister would be left with nothing, they preferred to invite her in as well rather than her having nothing. Steve, not fully understanding the details, had casually agreed and changed the ownership to his father's name during my absence. As a result of the change in ownership, we were faced with inheritance and gift taxes. However, my in-laws did not have the funds to pay these taxes, and we ended up having to use our savings to cover the cost. The savings were intended for my son Alex's future. Considering the inevitable expenses that would arise, I couldn't help but feel a boiling rage towards Steve and my in-laws for what they had done. However, dwelling on what had already happened was futile, so I had no choice but to accept it. The thought of parting ways with Steve crossed my mind with the resumption of living with my in-laws and sister-in-law, but considering Alex, I couldn't make a clear decision. We returned to the same life with my in-laws as before. Days of mental strain revisited me, but fortunately, work kept me busy enough not to dwell on it much. However, a significant event that would decide my feelings occurred a month after my in-laws and sister-in-law started living with us. I was once again asked to participate in a meeting with that company. This time, it was supposed to be short, requiring only an overnight stay. Despite hesitations due to the presence of my in-laws, it was still part of my work. In discussions with Steve, the initial accusations of infidelity raised by my mother-in-law were brought up, but after promising communication with the company, post-visit activities, and photo sharing, it was eventually agreed that I could go without any issues. "So I'll be leaving now," I greeted my mother-in-law, who was relaxing in the living room on the day of departure, but received no response. My father-in-law, watching TV, glanced at me for a moment but returned to his screen without showing much interest. Without saying anything more to them, I left the high-rise condo. After completing the meeting, I returned home the next afternoon. "I'm back," I announced to my in-laws in the living room, then immediately headed to my office to resume work. However, the room was empty, with many of the materials that were supposed to be there gone. At first, I couldn't understand the situation and why everything had disappeared, but I quickly realized it was the work of my in-laws and confronted them. "Mother, all the materials in my office are gone. Where did you put them?" I asked, hurrying into the room. "What are you making such a fuss about?" she retorted, momentarily taken aback, but then sipping her tea with an accustomed demeanor. "Those books and documents were essential for my work," I explained earnestly, hoping she'd understand. "That work includes drawings that don't seem practical." Despite my explanation, my mother-in-law laughed dismissively, unwilling to listen. "Those were very important to me." "Where did you put them?" I asked again, feeling desperation rise in me. "You're so noisy. We've already disposed of them," she said, showing annoyance and eventually admitting to throwing them away. I was speechless at her words, unable to say anything more. Mia needs her own room. She can always be with us, my mother-in-law explained. After moving, there wasn't enough room, so my sister-in-law had been sharing with my in-laws. However, exhausted by my sister-in-law's late-night activities, my in-laws decided, without consulting me, to give her my office, which stored materials and artwork crucial for my work, materials of immeasurable value to me. Hearing that my things were disposed of, I silently returned to my empty office from the living room. How much time had passed while lying on the floor, devoid of motivation? Alex came into the room. "Mom, is something wrong?" he asked. Noticing Alex had come home and it was already dark outside, I responded, Yeah, I'm fine. Welcome back." After he opened the door and saw the state of the office, he looked at me silently. "Did something happen?" Puzzled by his reaction, I asked with a smile, only for him to look back at me seriously. "Mom, are you going to divorce Dad?" His unexpected question left me speechless. "I know Grandma and Grandpa have been harsh on you and Dad isn't supporting you, right?" Alex stood in front of me, turning on the light and sitting down on the floor. I couldn't grasp his words immediately, just staring back at him. "If things keep going like this, you'll get sick," he said before leaving the room. Immediately after, I received a summons from my mother-in-law and was ordered to start preparing dinner right away. I quickly began the meal preparations, even while cooking dinner. The words my son Alex had uttered were racing through my mind. I had been postponing the decision to divorce, considering my son, but never expected him to actually bring up the subject of divorce. The fact that my son made such a statement was a huge shock to me. However, that incident solidified my decision to divorce. The next day, I promptly obtained a divorce form from the city hall. That evening, as soon as my husband Steve returned home, I presented the divorce form in front of my in-laws. "What's this?" Steve looked over the divorce form, not fully grasping its significance. "What's going on?" My mother-in-law approached to check the form immediately after. "Wait, what's this?" "A divorce form?" Her seemingly pleased remark made it clear to Steve that I wanted a divorce. He suddenly focused on me. "Let's get a divorce," Steve said. Upon my declaration, Steve's complexion turned pale rapidly. "Why all of a sudden?" He slammed the table vehemently, pressing me for an answer. "Well, I think it's entirely reasonable. After all, you were a wife who couldn't show much skill in either household chores or your profession," my mother-in-law said half-jokingly, pushing the conversation further towards me. As my husband panicked, caught off guard by her unexpected words, Steve paused and turned to look at my mother-in-law. "Perhaps if a wife in such a situation were to leave, you might find yourself free again," she suggested to Steve. "Honestly, you don't need a wife like her." My father-in-law also took the opportunity to express a similar sentiment to Steve. Faced with a series of comments from the family, Steve hesitated but ultimately seemed to agree and decided to sign the divorce form, handing it to me. "I sincerely thank you," I said, taking the signed divorce form and going to my son Alex's room, expressing deep gratitude. Upon opening the room, Alex was immersed in studying or something else, concentrated at his desk. "Alex, we're going to be leaving this place," I softly said to his back. He put down his pen and slowly turned towards me. "I understand," Alex responded quietly yet firmly, then turned back to continue what he was doing. Receiving my son's understanding response, I gently closed the door and began preparing for what was to come. I quickly arranged the moving preparations and submitted the divorce form at the city hall the following day. After Steve signed the divorce form, it took only about a week for me and my son to leave the house and take the first step towards starting a new life. Facing a new beginning, my son and I held hope for the future, determined to move forward while leaving the past behind. Since the new residence was already decided, I arranged for movers to transport our belongings. During the process, I made one last visit to the living room to bid farewell to my in-laws. However, my in-laws ignored my presence, not giving me a second glance. "Thank you for everything," I said politely, but received no response from them. "I hope you continue to work hard on the payments," I added with a hint of sarcasm, which made my mother-in-law turn to me abruptly. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. "The monthly payments for the high-rise condo are $3,500. "Good luck with that," I said. "You think you've won? It's clear that without our son, your lives won't be sustainable." My mother-in-law sneered. "No, we'll be fine," I calmly replied. My mother-in-law approached me with a displeased look. "What do you mean you'll be fine? Even now you're putting on a brave face," she confronted me. "I'm just stating the facts. Actually, I have an income," I quietly counted. This was a fact unknown to my in-laws. At one time, Steve was very capable and earned more than me. However, due to the recent worsening economic situation and the loss of his position, Steve's income has significantly decreased. Now, Steve's salary is less than mine, and to be honest, his income alone is barely enough to make the payments for the high-rise condo's mortgage. "Impossible!" My mother-in-law angrily confronted me, her face showing her fury at my statement. "I'm just stating the facts. If he has to pay a $3,500 mortgage, there's hardly anything left for other living expenses," I calmly replied. "How have you been managing to live up to now, then?" my mother-in-law retorted. She had not been aware of the situation with my work, and seemed to believe that I had no income of my own. So she must have thought that the mortgage and daily living expenses were all being covered by Steve's earnings. As my mother-in-law began to show signs of confusion, I couldn't help but smile. Seeing this, she became even more infuriated. "If you're going to live here, please make sure to pay the monthly mortgage of $3,500, I said calmly, and thanked my father-in-law, who was sitting frozen on the sofa, before leaving the room. That night, as expected, I received a call from Steve. The subject of the call was indeed about the mortgage for the high-rise condo. It seems Steve had not thought about the mortgage issue until he heard from my mother-in-law and hurriedly contacted me. "Hey, what's this $3,500 about?" he said over the phone. His confusion was evident through the phone. "What do you mean?" "It has been like that since the time of purchase," I responded coolly. "What? Really? But we can't afford it," Steve protested, perhaps forgetting the specifics. "That is no longer a concern of mine." I said, "Goodbye," and immediately hung up. I immediately stopped taking calls from my in-laws and Steve. I was instantly comforted and filled with a sense of serving them right after that. Afterwards, I found out about what transpired via Steve's buddy and co-worker. Due to his inability to make loan payments, Steve finally found himself in serious debt and was forced to file for bankruptcy. Naturally, my sister-in-law and in-laws were also facing bankruptcy since they lacked the money to make the payments. Steve was able to maintain his employment, but he now has to provide for the other three as well as himself, which means he has to work nights and is getting more and more exhausted every day. Furthermore, Steve has damaged his reputation to the point that he is begging for financial help at work. Even his old colleagues and acquaintances now shun any affiliation with him. The seriousness of their circumstances is further highlighted by the fact that Steve's parents were pressuring him to resign from his work and making requests for severance money. Maybe this is their way of getting back at me for not appreciating my line of work and for blindly falling in love with the opulent high-rise apartment. I am now really happy, focused on my profession, and live comfortably with my kid.